Welcome to Sundays with Jane Eyre. This is episode 25. What does your heart say? As St. John asks. Covering volume 3, chapter 8 or chapter 34 of Charlotte Bronte's Jane Eyre. I'm Edward G. Pettit of the Rosenbach in Philadelphia. And joining me today as co-host is Dr. Kathleen Hudson.
Hello.
Welcome back. How are you?
Very glad to be back. Very happy to be here. I'm good. I'm very excited for this chapter in particular.
Yeah, this will be fun.
Full of rage.
Yeah. And this is your last go around for Jane Eyre. Only four, including today. We just have 4 episodes to go.
The end approaches.
Yes,
the end approaches.
It does. So,
yep.
And today we have that very weird proposal.
Yes.
Yeah, lots and just some language in this that's really troubling on Jane's.
Yes. Yes.
All right.
Yeah. Very.
Well, welcome to all our erudite Brontesaurs and airheads. If you are new to the show, just a note in our format. If you're watching live on Zoom, the chat is for you to talk to each other. But if you have a question for us, so there's already a question in the Q&A, put it in the Q&A function on Zoom and we'll hit those today. We're also streaming live on YouTube. And I encourage everyone to like and the YouTube shows, and subscribe to the Rosenbach channel. And if you leave a comment or question there, I can get to it after the show. Kathleen, we talked some last time you were on about Austen and Bronte.
Yes.
And kind of similarities, difference between others. And I thought I'd ask you that again today, especially in light of, it's a proposal chapter.
Mm-hmm.
And we've had
a proposal that goes poorly.
Yeah, we've had unusual proposals before. Kristen on our Facebook page had a great comment on this, on St. John's proposal today. She said, I feel like Mr. Collins from Pride and Prejudice was like, ta-da, I have made the worst marriage proposal ever. And St. John Rivers was like, hold my beer.
Yes. Hold my tea. We're going. Yes, it is a very bad one, a terrible one. And it was funny because I was just talking to someone else about this, of the consistent misreadings of Mr. Darcy. We were sort of doing that I think there is a not misreadings of Mr. Darcy, but misreadings of he's so rude, he's so aloof and awful, and that must mean that he's awesome and we're in love, and that's a massive misreading of characters such as Mr. Darcy, who have these awful proposals, for example. And then
his first is really awful too. Yeah.
Yes.
Clearly.
Yeah. But the difference is, first off, I don't think that it comes from a bad place necessarily, but most importantly, that it's if anything, it's just that he's being too honest about what's going through his head. But that they change. The men have to change. Darcy changes his, or improves himself, or does things then for Elizabeth that improve his standing in relation to the rest of it. Similar to, it's not a proposal, but like in Northanger Abbey. Or in any Austen book, that it's you have a sort of initial attempt at a relationship that falls flat, but the characters then have to develop, they have to change to improve that. So being he's so distant and mean to me, it must be that he's so amazing. It's like, no, it's the distance and the mean part has to then shift, because it's not that he's trying to be, maybe he's shy, maybe misunderstood. It's that, I do love Austen for the fact that her heroes often have to evolve just as much as her heroines do in order to achieve a happy ending. It's not, here's this prize and I get him once I have figured everything out. It's, you both have to improve to work towards each other, which is something I think Bronte does, because St. John doesn't change. St. John doesn't, he is famously inflexible, and Rochester changes enough, I think, that she feels, physically at any rate, and enough about him change, his circumstances change, that Jane feels comfortable. Again, not spoiling the ending, but we're only four chapters away from the end.
And I mean, just to get, we have that pattern in Jane Eyre that happens in Austen with Rochester. I mean, we do get 2 proposals from Rochester. One's towards the end and one's in the middle, and he is a changed person, you know, afterward for the second one. And oddly enough, in Austen, is there any, like, even when there is, like, to compare the two, even when there are 2 proposals, or even, are there any good proposals that she actually gives us the scene, or does she just kind of describe it?
I mean, we
don't really get the scene.
I can't think of any necessarily off the top of my head. Even the Darcy re-proposal.
It's just a couple paragraphs saying, like, they have a conversation.
It's not a dialogue.
You know, we don't get the dialogue.
Oh gosh, I don't think so. You know what? Maybe one that counts is the end of Persuasion, when he writes her the letter.
We get the letter that she reads.
That's not really a proposal, but I do think that's one of the more, like, okay, so as a re-proposal, that
and
one
they have a
good.
conversation then
and
as they're walking on the street afterwards, but I don't quite remember if I don't think it's an actual proposal scene.
No, I don't know if they ever get to the proposal stage of that, because they were sort of already there. But there isn't, not really a proposal in Sense and Sensibility. Like, you know, Edward just tells her he's not married, and, you know, so and Brandon famously doesn't.
I'm trying to think. I think I just thinking movies now for that one.
And I don't remember. That's something that the movie kind of sticks in there, but it's not in the book of, like, no, I don't actually think there are too many elaborate good.
That's interesting. That doesn't. But I think for modern purposes, and even I think for Jane Eyre, as we'll get to at the end of the novel, it is immensely important to have that final proposal. Will you marry me? I mean, that's in, you know, films. People expect that, but, you know, in Austen, it's not. I think she feels it's not needed. But what we do get it by Bronte, and I wonder if it's Bronte and after that, perhaps that becomes a thing that you have to stick it. Like, the audience, like, if it's a marriage novel, I better see the damn. I want to see that him, you know, propose in a way.
I mean, I think Austen kind of displaces the marriage proposal scene onto more just a kind of shift in perspective scene of, you know, I realize I messed up scene, or you know, we have a confrontation, like, you know, again, like in Northanger Abbey, like in Pride and Prejudice, they have the confrontation, which is one element, and then they also have the reconciliation. And I think she kind of does break down the proposal scene into those 2 sections and sort of impose that on that. So almost that she doesn't need to feel that there's a marriage proposal for it to have the same effect. But I do think this one's so interesting, and I do think it hammers home that Jane really does value marriage, and as such the marriage proposal, in a different way than almost any of the men clearly do, because she does seem to value it. I mean, she rejects Rochester kind of purely on the basis of he is already married. She loves him, but he is already married, and it would be a lie to pretend to be married to him, or to not be married to him and be in a relationship with him. And that's pretty much exactly the same thing that she does with St. John. So it is interesting that for someone as unconventional as Jane is, she does put a lot of stock into marriage, I think, as an institution that needs to represent what it purports to represent, basically, that, you know, it needs to be real in every aspect, or else she can't be any part of it.
Well, and I didn't mention this, but before I started asking about Austen comparing Bronte, you know, for people who don't know, that Kathleen is teaching the a course for the Rosenbach on Austen's Sense and Sensibility. So I thought it appropriate to bring up last time and this time too. And
yeah, now that I think about it, there is no real marriage proposal in Sense and Sensibility. Just
so, you know, poor Marianne at the end, just like everybody convinces her, you must marry Brandon. So I remember that one is much more romantic. Earlier when I read that originally.
Again, when it's not Alan Rickman doing it, it all just sort of you know, zaps some of the allure out of it.
All righty. Well, we will get to a proposal later, definitely. And someone has a question that I want to hit right now. Lynn asks, could you explain more about the amazing coincidences in Bronte's stories? Last week you talked about providence. Was this a worldview, a literary device that everyone does to some degree, or a little of both? This happened last week in talking about, not only does Jane stumble across people who are actually her cousins she's related to, and this happens in this novel. We mentioned that it's a bit of providence, I think, last week, but I also just, for Jane Eyre and for Charlotte Bronte, for me, it's this world that she has created, a world where everybody is connected. And
yes.
It's that chapter that starts about presentiments and omens and things, and everything is, and we get some supernatural in this too. We haven't hit it yet. Next week, actually a supernatural occurrence happens. I'm
going to argue, though, there's a little bit of supernatural in this chapter too.
Oh, okay, good. Yeah. Well, we'll hit that later, definitely. But I think it is partly providence, but it's also this world that the author is trying to stress that Jane is connected to the people. Like, I heard John Mullen talking about this recently, in reference to Dickens, actually. And John Mullen was talking about, when these things happen, it's not that, oh, well, I don't want to give away endings of Dickens novels, but or maybe an Oliver Twist, like he runs.
Well, again, we know that Dumbledore died. I think it's been out long enough.
When it happens in Dickens, when suddenly someone realizes, oh my gosh, I'm related to you, or you were, I think Dickens' audience is not, what a coincidence. I think the reaction is more, of course, that's who he would run into. And we have, as modern readers, moved much further away from that, even though in our own lives, because this happens all the time. I mean, you run into people and meet people, and suddenly you find out you have all these connections. I mean, it's not something that everybody doesn't have happen in their life at some point, but we find that is improbable, and especially in fiction, it is frowned upon. But in the 19th century, that's just the way you write novels.
Yeah. And I do think it feeds into the romantic sensibility that I think Bronte is certainly articulating, and authors like her articulating, and it goes back to the Gothic, it goes back to early, even earlier novels. Even if you do something like Moll Flanders or Daniel Defoe, the coincidences are still there, even in realistic fiction. In the Gothic, I find it hard to believe that these many people are both long lost heiresses and related to each other. And but I do think, it speaks to that romantic sensibility, because she talks about how she wants to connect with other people. The last chapter was her basically saying, I'm gonna subdivide my fortune, because what I want more than my fortune is to connect with other people, to connect with family. And that's a very Jane Eyre specific impulse. Jane is unique in that I think that she was willing to give away £15,000 pretty much like that. But I think key to that too is this thing that what you want more than anything is connections with other people, that she recognized just from standing outside the window. She felt that immediate connection. And that's something that we attribute to heroines of sensibility, that you have you are so emotionally in tune and mature that you immediately can see inside someone's soul and connect with them, eventually. And that's usually applied to romantic relationships, but that it's also here with family is really feeding into that idea, I think, of sensibility as a good emotional thing. You connect to other people, and that's the thing you want more than money, more than anything else.
So it's not. So it's the kind of these coincidences in finding people is the kind of physical realization of this emotional thing that needs to be going on. Am I reading that right? Okay.
And it is, and that it is very neat and helps the plot. I'm sure it keeps it unentangled, but at the same time that it is. I mean, I think it's key to Jane's character that what she wants more than anything is a family, and once she gets a family, she holds on to the family, and that she connects I mean, that's sort of been her thing from the beginning, is I really just want a family. I want to belong somewhere. You know, I didn't belong at Gateshead. I, you know, kind of belonged at Lowood, but that was some hit or miss stuff. She is attached to Rochester, but she's also just attached to this idea of a family and a place in Thornfield. And now she actually does have a family, and she's like, yes, this is what I want. This is my ideal. So yeah, again, I think it's interesting for her as a character. And I do think it feeds into that idea of providence. Obviously, that's a very kind of, Christianity at this time is very much, the will of God is going to send you here, there, or the other. Yeah. But I also do think it speaks to the kind of things the Romantic poets would have believed of, our genius is connected, and we immediately felt this deep connection and this deep spiritual bond.
All righty. Well, I've had a few people asking about my drink today here. I have the Sundays with Jane Eyre hasn't become like the cocktail week show as the other Sunday shows did, but I felt like a Bloody Mary today, and I put it in this, Creature from the Black Lagoon tiki mug, which I really like. I have a Dracula and a Frankenstein tiki mug too, and I thought the creature was, I don't know, good today.
I just love the structural integrity of your skewer up there.
Yeah, and I had you need all drinks need all cocktails need a garnish, and absolutely. And a Bloody Mary should have a flamboyant garnish, I think.
Absolutely.
So
absolutely.
I was trying to think of a clever name to tie it in, but I really could, like I could have had just like a giant block of ice and gin in it, and it would be like St. John's Cold Heart, but I wanted a Bloody Mary. So
yes, well, which works, and I think that we're representing the universal monsters, so that works.
Yeah, and what do you have?
I'm having a chamomile tea in order to keep my blood pressure down as I talk about St. John's.
So there you go.
That's gotta. Oh yeah, I like the St. John's bloody mindedness.
St. John's bloody mindedness. Thank you, Elizabeth. That was from Elizabeth before the librarian at the Rosenbach. So St. John's bloody mindedness.
And Kathleen Hudson's blood pressure.
Perfect. All righty. The last chapter is when we had part of this coincidence coming in. St. John figured out Jane's secret identity, and they're cousins. She's also inherited £20,000, which he immediately just says splits with all her cousins, $5K a piece. St. John says no, you can't do that. And this will come in later too, I think, because one of his reasons, I think kind of his first reason, she says, of course it's just, don't you see that that would be a just thing to do? You guys got nothing and you should have gotten something. And his first reason is like, that's not the custom.
Yes.
And that's going to come into play later. And at the very end of the chapter, it's like, as he is, I was talking about this last week with the Ghoul Guides with Dr. Lauren Nixon and Mary Going, and we wound up talking about how St. John is supposed to be, and he believes he is, and he acts like he is, the patriarchal figure, and he's supposed to take care of the family, and yet he fails miserably, and argues that he's not supposed to succeed, and he should take the money because he can take care of his sisters. And that's his role. And Jane winds up kind of usurping his role. She's now the head of the family. She's giving them all the money. And we'll see today as she even takes care of them even more. Yes. And so I like that turnaround that happens in the last chapter into this.
Mm-hmm. No, yes, I reread the last chapter again because I wanted to get prepped for this one, but it just again reinforces that they're completely different value systems of and she says, I want a home and connections. I don't want the money. It's home and connections, and he just sees no value in it whatsoever. Mm-hmm. Because he has spent so long essentially trying to, as he says, control my inclinations, turn the bent of nature. So even up to this point, he's sort of depicted as this unnatural human being who has just killed every nice thing in him, or every kind of emotional feeling in him, because mm-hmm. he sees that as weakness. Whereas for Jane, I think it's very, very much a strength. And it does save her in that respect, I think, in the end. But
Pauline has a question here. How has Charlotte Bronte been able to create such a well-defined picture of a zealous, rigid, and controlling man in St. John? Do we know if her father or someone she knew had that character, or did she find in other literature she knew? There's been some written about, especially the proposal from St. John, that it's kind of likened to, and I have in my notes here in the Oxford that the proposal might be based on Henry Nussey's to Charlotte Bronte, and that he there is therefore a partial model for Rivers. Charlotte had written to her friend Ellen Nussey after her brother had proposed, intimates that in due time he shall want a wife to take care of his pupils, and frankly asks me to be that wife. So
they say romance is dead,
yeah. She seemed to have the same kind of proposal in her life, that like someone asking for like almost like as a business proposition, but here as a clerical proposition, that I need someone to help me with the clerical duties that I do. But also we have, there's no historical evidence that, Henry Nussey was like this super controlling, frigid kind of person, with a restless sea inside him. That's
he just blew the proposal, apparently. So
yeah.
Although it's interesting you bring that up, because I do remember rereading this again as a more adult than I did when I was younger, and just hated St. John outright, and I still do to make, like, again, this is such an unsettling chapter that kind of makes you want to take a hot shower after, because you just feel a little bit grubby with how comprehensively he's attempting to gaslight our heroine. But I'm curious a little bit in terms of what everyone thinks about this aspect, because rereading it as an adult, I'm like, she seems to also, though, be working overtime to make this a very nuanced portrait. It's not that she's defending him necessarily, although Jane does say repeatedly, hammer home, that he's a good man, and she values his friendship very, very much. In fact, to the point where she does not want to lose his friendship, and that's part of the reason why he's able to push her as much as he is. But that Bronte, at any rate, seems to be working very hard to defend him, or at least, if not defend him, at least trace his motivations to an understandably human, frustrated romanticism, frustrated passion, really, to try to, if not justify, at least explain it. And it was one of those things where I'm like, I guess I didn't notice it the first time when I was reading it as a teenager, but rereading it as an adult, he is more a tragic figure than a terrifying one in many ways. And he is sort of, but for the grace of God, there goes Jane, because he takes all of his emotionality and kills it, which is a little bit what Jane tries to do with Rochester. He struck me more as sad and as more complex this read through than I have in previous readings. And this is not a St. John apologist.
That's interesting, because I'm kind of the reverse. I kind of think I thought he was tragic in years past when I was younger and read, and now I just see him as,
horrible.
And dangerous, and dangerously, horrible. Yeah. But also, as far
still very dangerous. Again, this chapter was one of those things where I read it and I did feel slightly ill at the end of it. I'm like, oh God.
Well, Pauline's question about, historical or people that Bronte knew. I mean, and I think the father, the Bronte father, Patrick Bronte, often gets, well, specifically starting with Elizabeth Gaskell, painting him as a stern, hard man, and which didn't seem to be necessarily true. He seems to have that side of him, but also that was a very limited way of looking at him. I don't think that he was that kind of cold. He had unusual relationship with his children, but certainly not not one of the, he was certainly not like a fire and brimstone and you're all going to hell and was quite open with them about learning everything and doing everything. And so I don't know if there's any other historical figures that Bronte would have known. But within this novel, it's not, I think, well, and that she's I think a romantic artist. I mean, obviously is putting herself into this work, but also knowing that of her previous relationship a year before this that had ended with, well, the relationship she tried to create with Monsieur Heger in Belgium, her teacher there that she loved, and then he rejected her. I mean, obviously he was married with a family, and I think there might be a little bit of that going on here. Not that St. John is a Heger figure, but of the master student and thing going on here as well.
Yeah,
but
there's clear a lot of the teacher student overlap in there that again I think is a really uncomfortable power imbalance, which is interesting. But also, I mean, she's been in dialogue with a certain kind of Christianity from the beginning of the novel, of, you know, again, as from Brocklehurst on, she has been, you know, there is a kind of, in general, view of Christianity completely devoid of the emotional and spiritual. That is for Brocklehurst was really just the penny pinching, and for St. John, I think is just, again, crushing every part of your
the soul pinching,
so-called weakness. that yes, to misread all this stuff as a connect. I mean, I remember talking about like the pamphlets for naughty children. You know, that's just, it's sort of taking that attitude to its logical extreme of, I can't have friends, I can't have family, you know, you're not made for love, let's just go and wreck ourselves.
All righty. Well, the chapter doesn't begin that way. The chapter begins with, it was near Christmas by the time all was settled. The season of general holiday approached. I love a Christmas chapter. We get a little bit
kind of Jane's first holiday. It's nice. It feels like that to a certain extent. Yeah.
She says, I have long felt with pleasure that many of the rustic scholars like me, her students, she has to let them go for the holiday and let them go for good too. But she's also, deep was my gratification to find I had really a place in their unsophisticated hearts. She still has to constantly qualify them as peasants.
Yeah, I feel like we talked about this a little bit last time I was on, of the distinguishing between the deserving poor and the working poor and the undeserving poor, and that Jane may be a servant / governess. She may be, you know, in reduced circumstances a lot of the time, but Bronte continuously makes a distinction, and Jane herself makes a distinction between, you know, a certain kind of what I guess could only be termed as like degenerative poverty, as opposed to the genteel poverty of others, the elevated mind.
A little bit, and we'll get in a moment here, like a little bit of xenophobia too, that is also evident in Charlotte Bronte's letters. But she says that some of her scholar, half a dozen, are as decent, respectable, modest, and well-informed as could be found in the ranks of the British peasantry. And then she goes on, like, the British peasantry are the best taught, best mannered, and most self-respecting of any in Europe. I have seen paisans and blaurinnen, and the best of them seem to me ignorant, coarse, and besotted compared with my Morton girls. When
What's
Bronte
the little
goes,
nationalism between friends, you know?
And when Bronte goes to Belgium, she says some horrible things about mainly for her, I think it's the Catholics and the way they behave.
Well, you know how the Catholics pan out in British literature.
I do. Well, you know, And I'm an old Catholic boy, so I get it.
Yeah, same. So it's it's.
But it reminds me. It also reminds me of Mary Shelley, and you read her travel letters. And she's like, these people are dirty and awful, like everywhere she goes. Yeah. And she's clearly as poor as they are at that point.
Well, it always cracks me up, that line in Frankenstein when she's talking about Justine before Justine is executed, that, you know, servants in other places aren't the same as servants here. And it's obviously she's writing as not as a British character, but you sort of get the same vibe of it, of, you know, yes, but you are also a little xenophobic. And maybe this is irony, but also maybe it's not.
Yeah, but Jane has this relationship where and she's honest about it. She was honest before. She said, like, I shouldn't feel, I shouldn't feel this way about them. I should appeal to the best things in them and better their lives. And it's a little bit. I'm not going to talk about this now. I'm going to say this at the very, very end. Well, no, I'm not. I'm going to talk about it now.
Okay. I'm waiting.
it's the missionary zeal thing, and it's one of the things that St. John recognizes in her, that he wants to go off and educate these poor savages in India about Christ and how he's their savior, and in that way he's elevating them. He's taking them from this kind of pagan, like uncivilized people and raise savages, these pagan savages, and he's raising their status. And Jane is kind of doing that too, just on a different scale within the kind of British class and respectability system.
Yeah. And it's one of those things again where I'm like, yes, exactly. It's very similar. And I feel like Bronte portrays that as, again, kind of frustrated ambition and arrogance on the part of St. John, but Jane is guilty of the same thing if that is the case. So
there are lots of parallels. You mentioned this already. There's lots of parallels with her and St. John that Bronte is putting in here. I mean, you said there, but for the grace of God go I, and I think that's what Bronte is hinting at all along here. And it's one of the things that I'll have a question later that I think is an answer for something. But in any case, right here, hey, British peasants, the best. And you better believe it.
Our peasants, the best peasants.
And then here comes St. John already planting the seeds for his missionary work. This is like the weirdest grooming ever. Because he's grooming her to be his, like, his missionary wife. And he's talking about, have you got your reward from helping them? The consciousness of having done some real good. And then he says, would not a life devoted to the task of regenerating your race be well spent, which is a really creepy way to put it for modern, audiences.
Anytime you do any kind of generating, we're not doing that.
And generating your race is like, whoa, what are you talking about? I mean, he's not like some crazy eugenics Nazi. That's not what he means. He means Christianity, and everybody should be.
Which
Christian.
Again, in any kind of post-colonial discourse is probably just as bad. Like still very inherently problematic. Although he does not need it to be.
Jane says, I want to enjoy my own faculties as well as cultivate those of others.
I think that's such a cool response. I'm like, but also I want to enjoy being me. Can I enjoy, I if I have the option to not have to just sacrifice everything I am to help other people, wouldn't I want to kind of just, be me for a while? I'm like, that's such a cool.
Well, he has a response. What aim, what purpose, what ambition in life have you now? And her answer is, well, first I'm going to clean the house. I'm going to clean that damn house and clean down. Do you comprehend the full force of that expression? To clean down the more house from chamber to cellar.
This is such a red flag in terms of St. John. And I think it's but I do think it's also such a really cool, again, insight into women's work in particular. I was reading a really, really good book called What She Ate by Laura Shapiro, where she basically traces the food stories of many famous women. So how their relationship with food fit into their creative output or anything. And she has a chapter on Dorothy Wordsworth. So a lot of that is, that Dorothy Wordsworth, who's, William Wordsworth's sister, really developed she kept a journal. She kept a journal of all of her domestic accomplishments. She kept a food journal, basically. And that it's a brilliant piece, underrated piece of romantic writing, because, it's almost pastoral poetry, how she describes domestic tasks and meals shared, and that this is a real space where she can connect with her brother. Is, he's the poet, she takes care of him. And that there's this real great kind of redemptive quality in domestic work. And I was rereading this and I was like, it's, I really can't speak to any kind of relationship that, between Dorothy Wordsworth and Charlotte Bronte, obviously, I don't think that they were,
I don't think they would have been available.
No, they never would, and no one would have read Dorothy Wordsworth's stuff. But I'm like, it's just interesting that in two separate places, both engaging with this romantic ideology, and for two women, that they find real redemptive emotional self-expression in domestic work for other people. I thought was just very, very cool, very redemptive. Yeah.
Yeah. And here it's not just cleaning the house, which it goes into details she's do, but also not just the cooking, but the Christmas baking, which I love. Beating of eggs, sorting of currants, grating of spices, compounding of Christmas cakes,
and just taking so much materials
for mince pies. I mean, all that I love.
Yeah, so much joy in it. It's really kind of lovely to see for someone who hasn't really had a home of any kind of permanence up to this point, to see her throw herself into making this domestic space. And as you said, she takes on the role of patriarch. She also takes on the role of matriarch. She is both parents, and it's one thing to give everyone money, but it's another thing to kind of build an entire house from the ground up, which seems to be what she has done here. Well, so it's a massive accomplishment.
St. John's response is, St. John smiled slightly, still he was dissatisfied. And he says he wants her to look a little higher than domestic endearments and household joys. And her response is, the best things the world has.
Yes, best things the world has.
You can, because his, and I think Bronte tries to convince us of the great value of his kind of spiritual goodness and the things that he can achieve spiritually. And yet she has a character that clearly we many of us identify with, who is constantly letting him know that, like, no, it's about everyday life and our relationships with each other.
Yeah, that's it. And again, he shouldn't be surprised. She told him, I want home and connections. I want a family. So if that's not, she's not lying in any respect. She is 110%, doing what she set out to do.
St. John is going to be magnanimous, and he says, I excuse you for the present. 2 months grace I allow you for full enjoyment of your position. Oh, thanks, St. John. Guess what? I'm going to take 2 months anyway. Like you don't get to say what I take. Why don't you take like a year?
Yeah, well, do you think you're
like 8 months or something?
Yeah. So, do you think you've employed me? Like, what is this? What is this?
He wants her to look beyond Morehouse and Morton, the selfish, calm, and sensual comfort of civilized affluence. I mean, he's got issues.
He does. If he's trying to make it seem less appealing, though, I think he failed in his word choice. That sounds lovely.
He says, and that's so he's gonna, and she gets home and she purchases new furniture and new carpets and curtains, and she remodels, Morehouse.
And again, I love how much time and energy Bronte is putting into describing it all with such, again, genuine pleasure, I think, of like, look at all this awesome stuff we get to share.
He shows up and he's like, good job. And then she addresses us and she says, now I did not like this reader. St. John was a good man, but I began to feel he had spoken truth of himself when he said he was hard and cold. The humanities and amenities of life had no attraction for him. Like, what are you telling me, Jane? What do you mean? Like, yes, didn't you see that too?
Well, but again, that early qualifier of he's a good man, she keeps saying that. She keeps, I think, again, framing him almost as the saint, which is the good thing, and it's also the problem. That he should be what she ought to be aspiring toward. He's good for the given value of good, but it sort of is. But is there any point to it if it's not then translated into, being as warm as possible, or as sharing the affections around?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And but she's certain. Well, as certain she's going to be. She says, he would hardly make a good husband, that it would be a trying thing to be his wife. So she really recognizes that he's like, and he talks about his love for Rosamond, and like, in a sense that she kind of agrees, like, yeah, you're right, you shouldn't have married her, you'd have been miserable, you're not
Yeah.
that kind of person. So she doesn't see him any longer as, I'm putting on a front, but I could really go this way. She's saying, no, you can't go. I agree with you, you can't go that way. You
Yeah.
can only be this kind of thing. And she says,
But
I
I think it
saw.
was interesting too that
Go ahead.
it's that earlier chapters, it seemed like that was a possibility. Again, I think he fundamentally does share some similarities with Jane in that he's a deeply passionate person, but it's how you moderate that and present it to the world. I mean, again, Jane says, I have trouble finding a middle ground. Either I'm in open rebellion or I'm but whatever I'm doing, it for Jane, so much of this book is about trying to learn to live with her feelings. And St. John also has very strong feelings, and his way of learning to live with his feelings is basically to, stomp them out like a cigarette under his shoe and then be like, okay, well, moving on from that, never to speak of it again.
And he didn't even enjoy the cigarette.
And he didn't even enjoy it. He lit it and then he stomped it
It wasn't
out.
even like a post-coital cigarette.
Didn't even take a drag. Just like, yep, let it out. Okay. That was fun. That part where he imagines, a married life, but only for 15 minutes.
Yeah.
Again, like Jane, he's very imaginative, but unlike Jane, he just sort of takes that imaginativeness and then it's like, okay, enough of that. We're moving on. That's as much as I get. I get this crumb and that's it. And now I'm past it and through it.
I think St. John would watch like porn for 15 minutes, but he would time it. Like, I'm going to watch.
Absolutely. Yeah. There's a little egg timer.
Get some kind of pleasure out of this. Okay. Yes. Now it's awful. I can't believe I did that, and flagellate himself with a whip. All righty. And here's also where Jane, at the end of this paragraph here about now I didn't like this reader. She says, I saw he was one of the material from which nature hews her heroes. Christian and pagan, her lawgivers, her statesmen, her conquerors, a steadfast bulwark for great interests to rest upon, but at the fireside, too often a cold, cumbrous column, gloomy and out of place. That, like, this is the kind of guy, he can go out and do great things in the world and affect people, but he can't get along with his, his wife or his children and
or himself, frankly. Yeah. I think again, he is only as calm and collected as he is because he's cut out massive chunks of his own personality and again stepped on them.
Yeah, if I don't have to have any emotion for you people, then I mean, he's a sociopath in a sense. Then he's trying to create himself into a sociopath, and
then he tries to do that to Jane.
Yeah. And it all comes down to the fact that especially at this point, she reads him. She understands who he is completely. He does not understand her yet. He really thinks she is, like, he sees similarities in her, but he doesn't recognize that, like, she can't reject these kind of domestic joys and domestic relationships. So he doesn't understand her. She does understand him in a way. So
and I think you're right too, in that she does read him. It's still a little bit of an incomplete picture. She definitely reads his strength. Later she'll see his flaws, I think, a little bit more clearly. Yeah. And that again will kind of save her from him to a certain extent, because she'll be able to meet him on a little bit more equal ground. Yeah. But no, I think she's right in her reading of him as having a great deal of that kind of inflexible strength.
I like to meet him on equal ground. That is exactly what she realizes later in this chapter, and then she does. Mary and Diana come home. They are overjoyed,
and they're lovely. Honestly, how did St. John ever get two such wonderful sisters?
They laughed, kissed me, then Hannah patted Carlo, the dog, who was half wild with delight. This is the life that Jane wants, and she has, and I think as readers, it's just so nice that she's gotten this after everything she's been through, not only from childhood, but then the great promise that I'm going to be Mrs. Rochester and have everything I ever dreamed of in a person, because she doesn't dream of riches in the grand house, but in a relationship, and then it's just yanked away from her. And now to have this almost seems as if, you don't even go looking for him.
Yeah.
Just like with Diana and Mary for the rest of your life.
It is one of those things, where this is almost a more modest version of happiness. Rochester was almost too unbelievable with the big giant manor house and all the fix. I mean, his over emphasis on material stuff has now turned to Jane's reimagined emphasis on material stuff only insofar as it gives pleasure to her cousins. So,
well, it was Christmas week. We took the no settled employment, but spent it in a sort of merry domestic dissipation. I'm hoping there was wassail involved. So
I'm sure there was. I think any kind of dissipation requires
wassail, some delicious cakes and mince pies, and we're doing good here.
Yes. And St. John just takes himself off, basically.
Yeah. Well, at the first night, he's like off. He has to go help his parishioners. And again, that's his good side. That is, people in my parish need me. I need to go help them. And that's the kind of thing that, well, yeah, I agree with you, St. John. That's a good thing. You should do that. And it's your job.
Performed an act of duty, made an exertion, felt his own strength to do and deny, and was on better terms with himself. So I mean, again, he has found a way to do that, which, as long as he keeps it in his own lane, is totally fine.
But he's not content just to do that here. He needs to do it on the grand scale, and someone else needs to do it too with him. Diana tells him that his departure from England was now definitively fixed for the ensuing year. And then one of them, is it Diana? It's Mary. She asked about Rosamond Oliver. And
be married to Mr. Granby, which is a name.
Mr. Grant, one of the best connected and most estimable residents in grandson and heir to Sir Frederick Granby.
Which has to be a character in Dickens, right? Sir Frederick Granby. That just
She has moved on, and
quickly.
Yeah. We have reading St. John the way we read St. John, we have no idea why she wanted him to begin with. She's not Jane Eyre. Jane Eyre recognizes this kind of great thing in him, but I just can't. I guess it's just that he's good. He's really good looking.
Well, and again, he has to be. Otherwise, what? Yeah. But I do think, again, it is one of those things of we don't really know St. John before this point, and he describes himself as having been, I think, a different person. He was a more passionate, ambitious, probably friendlier. I mean, Rosamond certainly seemed to think that he was a more generous, outgoing person. So we don't really know what has happened to him. I mean, he sort of to a certain extent describes what has happened to him as, I was this person, and then I kind of have this crisis of not faith so much as ambition. He took orders, and it was the same thing every day, and his passionate nature couldn't live with that. So he had to kill his passionate nature in order to stay in his job. And that's awful. That's
before
rough.
when Jane had talked to him about Rosamond, he's like, ouch, and and she'll move on from me in a heartbeat, and almost as if she's fickle, like she might think he's the one, and then she'll move on to somebody else. No, it's because you acted like such a cold jerk. Of course she moved on. Why would she continue to hold a flame for you when you behave the way you have towards her? So she has moved on. Good for her.
Good for her. Good. You go, girl. You go.
Okay. There's a couple questions here, but they're both to hit a little bit later when St. John talks to Jane. But now at this point, Jane is noticing that he's been much colder towards her. He had not kept his promise of treating me like his sisters. He continually made little chilling differences between us, which did not all attend to the development of cordiality. In short, now that I was acknowledged his kinswoman and lived under the same roof with him, I felt the distance between us. Now it's getting troubling for me, because this is the abuser at work. This is
Well, I think it's interesting. He's a liar. I mean, he made a promise. He didn't keep it. He lies to her later when he wants her to learn a language. Again, he says for certain reasons, but really he has other reasons. And Jane is very much, again, about the truth. She's a heroine for the truth. So we already sort of have him being disingenuous to the point of gaslighting, for sure.
He's clearly working on her feelings and her emotions as, you know, a member of his family, as someone he clearly wants to marry. This is what abusers do. They start to control people's emotions and put them in situations where they're, you know, like in this situation, now I'm going to get cold and distant from you. Well, what do you have to do? Well, then that's going to force Jane to, she's going to have to come to him now and ask for him to give her more attention. And it's really troubling throughout this entire chapter. And then there's a point where the girls say, the Diana and Mary say that, oh, Jane, you know, couldn't go out in this hard weather to visit people like you do. And he says, Jane is not such a weakling as you would make her. She can bear a mountain blast or a shower or a few flakes of snow as well as any of us. That, you know, it's this grooming, you know, I'm putting you in a position where you are going to have to say yes to me.
Yeah. And she said, you know, I sometimes, when I return, sometimes a good deal tired and not a little weather beaten, I never dared complain because I saw that to murmur would be to vex him. On all occasions, fortitude pleased him. The reverse was a special annoyance. So yeah, that she is shaping her entire attitude. And it's an interesting thing too.
Spoken exactly like somebody in an abusive relationship.
Yes. Yeah. And I mean, he's doing what Rochester doesn't do this necessarily to the same extent. I would argue
he does it differently, and we'll talk about. I noticed that later. Like he Rochester has a plan too, but he goes about it in a way that I think frees Jane.
It's narrating who Jane is.
Yeah,
and sort of trying to take authorial authority. You know, I'm the one who says who you are, away from Jane, and putting it, you know, again, either in Rochester's hands or St. John's hands. And I'm going to speak for her. She's not a weakling. Don't baby her. You know, is that he is taking authorial identity, you know, and a right to self-definition away from Jane. This I again, not to jump ahead, but this is also the part where I think there's an argument to be made that there's a little bit of the supernatural in the language at any rate, because she is saying that one afternoon, so she's reading Schiller again. So she's back on the German strong authors. And she says, you know, I happened to look his way. There I found myself under the influence of the ever watchful blue eye. How long it had been searching me through and through and over, I cannot tell. So keen was it, and yet so cold. I felt for the moment superstitious, as if I were sitting in the room with something uncanny. And it's very interesting, I think, in terms of she's in very real psychological danger, but the language that Bronte uses is almost like from Polidori's The Vampire to a certain extent. I mean, I think there's a case to be made for St. John as a vampiric character almost, you know, that he's got the eye that can hypnotize you and pin you in place, and that he's sort of sucking a lot of the life out of Jane, and he controls her, and he's almost a Svengali, you know, mind controller who's able to do that. And I mean, even taking the supernatural out of it, I think there's definitely something to be said for this depiction of an emotional and psychological abuser. But the language that she uses, like I read that and I'm like, something uncanny. What a great way to say that, is something uncanny, to sort of suggest that unheimlich, unhome, you know, oh, he's there, but is he a human being after all? Yeah.
Yeah, that works so well. And the Svengali bit really works well for me in this, and that kind of, you know, we talked, and back when we did Sundays with Dracula, we talked a good bit about George du Maurier's novel Trilby, in which Svengali features and has this kind of force over people. I hadn't noticed that. That's a really good pickup there by you. And yeah, that it does hint to there's something strangely supernatural going on. These are his powers.
Yeah. I mean, she says, I could no longer talk or laugh freely. A tiresomely importune instinct reminded me that vivacity, at least in me, was distasteful to him. Again, it's almost that, I think someone put in the chat, like an energy vampire kind of sucking it out so that she can't be this vivacious person. She can't be happy. He's literally, his presence drains her of that in an attempt to, as a metaphor for the psychological abuse. I think it's an interesting that she's using the language of the Gothic horror, and the vampire, or the Dybbuk who.
What's interesting, because she's used vampire to refer to her vision of Bertha at night when she saw her come in at night, but actually it's ironic because Bertha was not acting vampiric at all in that situation. It just was in a general sense that she's kind of threatened her by being in her room at night.
She looks like it,
but St. John really is, and the Brontes know this too. I mean, Wuthering Heights is a vampire novel without
the vampire,
actually being a vampire, but it is, and they use the word vampire in that novel, and it's all about that kind of relationship that is taking away the energy of people, the life of people, very selfish, feeding on them, and
making someone a slave, making them do what you want. Again, he's still lying to her about, I want you to learn Hindustani.
Now he's going to ask her to learn Hindustani,
So to help me, because it will help me to have a pupil, it'll help me learn the language. And I'm like, you're lying though, because you know what you're angling for here. So it's being disingenuous for a purpose, but
it is because he's kind of tricked, because she realizes, would I do him this favor? I should not perhaps have to make the sacrifice long, as it went now barely 3 months to his departure. So in my mind, he knows that she's thinking that, like, it's only going to be for a little bit. So of course she'll say yes.
Yeah. And that other line, when Diana and Mary agreed that St. John should never persuaded them to such a step, he answered quietly, "I know it." I'm like,
that's
gosh,
that's
me.
You're shooting it like to go right to him. I know it.
Yeah, like I know it. Yes, I know who the vulnerable person in this is, and I am going to use them. Was so horrifying.
And now it becomes this very Svengali-like relationship here. She says, I found him very patient, very forbearing, and yet an exacting master. He expected me to do a great deal. Well, he's not really like Svengali in the novel. Svengali in the novel is domineering and always, intense. St. John is very careful about that and does this in a way that, like, I'm not revealing that I'm controlling you. But
I do think it points to that power imbalance, though, kind of inherent to a teacher-student relationship, if it's not really a teacher-student relationship.
Well, and this is where it is here. This is the master-student relationship here that quite frankly Charlotte Bronte likes. Likes it in her own life, and she finds that this to be a kind of an attractive position to be in with a man.
But it's interesting that she identifies his praise and notice as more restraining than his indifference. Like that she I think it's wonderfully psychologically insightful to be like, when he approves of me, that's worse somehow than him outwardly being violently abusive. It's that he has this and withholds it, or he has it and he gives it to me in such dribs and drabs that I then bend over backwards to try to get more of it. Is such a great way to do that. That's so insightful.
Yeah, and it's interesting to look at this too, in that she clearly in her own life, and we can read this in her letters to Hégère, she's kind of asking for you to be my master. Then she writes a novel when she turns the tables, and they do have the relationship. And now by the time she gets to Jane Eyre, and she has been absolutely rejected by him, and she understands that, now she's kind of working through it and almost realizing that, like, well, actually, this isn't
in
such
hindsight,
a good thing. And now we're getting this language here about this controlling aspect of someone that would really kind of take away her ability to choose, and where she would have to constantly just, all I'm doing is pleasing you, pleasing you, pleasing you, because I'm afraid to not please you.
Yeah. I do think it speaks, though, to Jane's psychology, which is that she is someone who is not afraid of self-sacrifice, but for the right reasons, for the right causes.
Yep.
She has shown time and time again, and will show, that she is willing to go to great lengths for the people she cares about, but it has to be her choice, and it has to be the right circumstances, and it has to be something, again, that will nourish her in return. She finds, again, self-sacrifice redemptive, but only in the circumstances where, again, redemption is possible, where growth is possible.
If later St. John says, no, but I love you, she's gone. She's doing it. She's going to say yes. It is, now she would still argue with him. You say you love me, and she would make him like,
but I don't believe that this is
not just going to accept it, but she would, if he could convince her of that it is an affair of the heart, then she's going to buy into it. But only because she thinks Rochester's gone completely. She's never going to find him.
Right. True. Yeah.
All righty. She says, and now she's, when he said go, I went, come, I came, do this, I did it, but I did not love my servitude. I wished many a time he had continued to neglect me. So she's aware, but she still can't stop it. And she's trapped in this relationship. And then Diana, why did you do this? Diana says, you kiss us goodnight every night. Jane's your third sister. You should kiss her too. Oh,
stop, Diana.
It's really creepy. And then Jane describes his kiss. What did she say? This, do you have that there? You gonna read that?
So there are no such things as marble kisses or ice kisses, or I should say my ecclesiastical cousin's salute belonged to one of these classes. But there may be experiment kisses, and his was an experiment kiss. When given, he viewed me to learn the result. It was not striking. I'm sure I did not blush. Perhaps I might have turned a little pale, for I felt as if this kiss were a seal affixed on to my fetters. Wow.
And he never omitted the ceremony afterwards.
With the gravity with which I underwent it, it seemed to invest it for him with a certain charm. The fact that she's not particularly enjoying it is this
is like really weird. This is like pedophile kind of kiss. This is really, because he kisses her too, and it's an experiment kiss, and then he viewed me to learn the result. I mean, it's really not.
And the fact that I didn't blush, in fact, I went pale, which again I think suggests a little bit more vampirism, that she's being pushed into this kind of ideal sentimental heroine who is more attractive in death, getting pale, looking sick.
And I don't think I'm just reading this with very modern eyes, in that, like, we recognize abusive relationships more kind of thing, because we're not like you old British peasant people that don't know anything. I don't think it's that at all, especially because in this next paragraph, the language she uses, I daily wished more to please him. And then all through here, she's describing, she uses disown, stifle, wrest, force, racked. I mean, these are the words that she's using to describe their relationship. I mean, whether or not even Bronte is completely conscious of the way she's creating this abusive and someone tied into this cycle of abuse, she certainly is as she's writing it, because those are the words that are coming out.
No, I mean, I think it's very intentional. Just because she didn't have the vocabulary for it, I think there's too much of it for her to be seeing this as anything other than a seriously dangerous relationship for Jane, and something fundamentally, that there is something fundamentally dangerous and malevolent about St. John and how he's flowing, for all that she keeps saying, oh yeah, well, he's a good man, and this is kind of why he is the way he is. That he is willing to turn all this, the effect he's having on Jane is indefensible. Yeah, very much. Yeah.
Well, now we get this interesting moment here, because she says about him, the thing was as impossible to say no to him. What was impossible? What is impossible? I daily wish more to please him. He's doing, I could never reach it. He wanted to train me to an elevation I could never reach. And then she says, the thing was impossible as to mold my irregular features to his correct and classic pattern, to give my changeable green eyes the sea blue tint and solemn luster of his own. And this is interesting because this harkens back to something that happened with Rochester. And with Rochester, right after they're engaged, she comes in and meets him the next morning, and he says, Jane, you look blooming and smiling and pretty, truly pretty this morning. Is this my pale little elf? Is this my mustard seed? Blah, blah. You know, he loves to do that. And then he says, the satin smooth hazel hair and the radiant hazel eyes. And in parentheses, Jane says, I had green eyes, reader.
Yeah.
But you must excuse the mistake. For him, they were new dyed, I suppose. Now, it's this lovely moment, and I actually like this moment a lot, where in spite of the infantilizing language Ross used for, is that because she is transformed for him, and he can't even recognize. Well, she's transformed in a good way, and that now you're this beautiful creature because I love you and you love me, and we have admitted it, and that's all.
And the details don't matter because the sentiment is, I love you, you're gorgeous. Yeah.
The negative part of it is he's shaping her into what he wants her to be.
Right.
But in this case, it is her only choice is to change her green eyes to look exactly like his.
I think this is why the recurring thing.
Yeah. And like, I love the way you put it about they're both trying to narrate Jane's life and create the character, like both Rochester and St. John. But for me, the biggest difference is that St. John wants to put her in fetters. And Rochester wants her just to free her. Like, please, Jane, just say everything you want and act however you want, and that will make me happy. And it's true. That is what happens in this novel. Like, you know, we cannot like Rochester for the things that he does and the way he does it, but he does tell Jane to free herself, and she does that. And you know, so
I think he feels like he is made better when she is also herself, like that their interplay. I think he does still well Jane is very much a part of Rochester's identity. I think he does seem to recognize them as separate people, and that he improves from interplay with Jane, not by stifling Jane. St. John's the opposite. St. John needs to incorporate Jane into his own everything. Again, which is why he wants to marry her. It's because this way you can't leave, and you're mine, and I own you, and that's you know, and again, that it's not, this is a mistake where I was so enraptured with love, the details don't matter, what color your eyes are. That you know, it's impossible to fundamentally change my eyes to a different color. You can mistake it. You can get so wrapped up in your own emotional stuff that you say, my eyes are brown, when in fact they're green. But you can't fundamentally change it. What St. John wants to do is fundamentally change Jane. Yes. What Rochester wants to do is, you know, have Jane close, but not necessarily, I think, fundamentally change. I mean, make her more agreeable in certain areas, or get her to do what he wants in certain areas, and but not fundamentally change her.
That scene with Rochester, he's asking you those questions. Is this my pal? Is this, you know, the little girl? Is this the person with hazel, with hazel eyes? And her answer is, it is Jane Eyre, sir.
It's me.
Yeah. Like
she
asserts her own identity, and like, she's like, yeah. I'm Jane Eyre is her response to Rochester. And although St. John doesn't specifically say that this kind of thing, he does. Well, later when he says like, you are this kind of, he does. He says, you are this kind of person.
I think it's a lot more declarative statements, than questions.
He doesn't ask if she is. He tells her she is, and then Jane has to combat that. Well, he says, but half a year wasted away here. And she says, she's trying to find out about Rochester, because this leads her to immediately think about Rochester, the eyes thing. Yeah.
Perhaps you think I had forgotten Mr. Rochester. Kind of, maybe.
Yeah, but reader, amidst these changes of pace and fortune, not for a moment. She's still longing for him. The craving to know what had become of him followed me everywhere. And she tries to find out. Obviously, Mr. Briggs doesn't know. Nobody seems to know. She writes letters. Mrs. Fairfax doesn't return a letter. She gets nothing but silence. Half a year goes by, another 6 months. Spring comes, summer approach.
So much for that 2-month break.
Hey, St. John, I thought you said it was 2 months. Well, he's got to learn Hindustani, and he's been obviously,
which was only going to take 3 months, by the way.
So, she's still doing the Hindustani, and she says, I like a fool. She recognized, I like a fool never thought of resisting him. I could not resist him. Now, this is, of course, this is Jane Eyre writing 10 years later. So this is perspective as well. And she recognized all through this novel, we get her, recognizing perspective. So Jane at the time perhaps doesn't think I'm being a fool, but Jane writing 10 years later, looking back on this, realizes, boy,
that was a toxic relationship, and I am well shot of it. Yeah.
Well, she breaks down at one, all this pressure. She finally cries. Words were lost in sobs. His, of course, reaction is, we will wait a few minutes till you are more composed.
And again, I can almost picture him taking the watch out and setting it up. And it's like, you get 15 minutes, and then we're going for a walk.
Yes. And she goes for the walk with him. And I love this language here. They go out for a walk. She says, he's to go out, walk here, and I'll join you in a moment. And then she says, I know no medium. Read that little paragraph there. Well, actually, but let me preface that with saying earlier on, when in the chapter, he says, when he is trying to, dominate her and shape her, she says something like she can't say no to him. What it's actually about the Hindustani. It's like, I can't say no to him. And my question was, well, why can't you say no to him? And then I think we get a lot of explanations for why she can't say no. And I think this paragraph is exactly why she can't say no, that she winds up answering later. Go ahead.
I know no medium. I never in my life have known any medium in my dealings with positive, hard characters, antagonistic to my own, between absolute submission and determined revolt. I have always faithfully observed the one up to the very moment of bursting, sometimes with volcanic vehemence, into the other. And as neither present circumstances warranted nor my present mood inclined me to mutiny, I observed careful obedience to St. John's directions. And in 10 minutes, I was treading the wild track of the glen side by side with him.
So she thinks that that's what's going on with her life. Like she rises, and I think this goes way back to her being a child. That I
mean, there's definitely a precedent for this, which is she submits until she has a fit, basicly.
I was obedient till I was 9, and then I was like, "You people, leave me alone." And then that she feels herself always in this kind of situation that I will completely obey until you go too far.
And I have a line, and you haven't crossed it yet.
And he's about to cross it. He says, well, he goes out. He's out looking at the glen, and she feels like he's, that with his eyes he bade farewell to something, the life that then aloud he says, and I shall see it again in dreams when I sleep by the Ganges. He's going to leave, and now he's going to say goodbye to the place, and he wants her to join with him. He says, it seems strange to me that all around me do not burn to enlist under the same banner, to join in the same enterprise. I felt as if an awful charm was framing round and gathering over me. Ooh, there you go. More of that supernatural language there.
Again, it's the power his words. I mean, she says that so much, that the power of his words, and when he talks, are so, again, there's so much supernatural, as it says in a couple minutes. It's like as if a summons from heaven, a visionary messenger, but it's St. John. It's just St. John.
Yeah.
So
And then he says, and what does your heart say? Demanded St. John. What does your heart say? And my heart is mute. She says it twice. My heart is mute.
Yeah.
My heart is mute.
I don't want to go to India.
And then his response is, then I must speak for it. And then here's
the deep, relentless voice.
Here's the proposal. Jane, come with me to India. Come as my helpmeet and fellow laborer. Yeah, that's
and again, romance. They say romance is dead.
a hard no.
Yeah. But again, talking over her. I must speak for it. No, you don't speak for it. She already said no. Like, but that is a relentless voice. You know, the hills heaved. It was as if I had heard a summons from heaven, as if a visionary messenger. You know, she begs him for mercy. But
when you say it, however you say it, will you marry me? And the response is, oh, St. John, have some mercy.
Mercy.
You failed.
That's like when you kiss somebody and they go pale, and then whenever you kiss them after that, they're just sort of like solemn faced gravity. It's like, yeah, that's romance there for you.
Oh, have some mercy is what she's asking.
Have some mercy.
And then he's like, no, I'm going to convince you with this. God and nature intended you for a missionary's wife. It is not personal, but mental endowments they have given you. You are formed for labor. I mean, it's a little bit like Mr. Collins's, kind of proposal.
Yes,
although he's so lascivious in his own little creepy way.
You are so second best in every possible way, but
yeah. No, that's Darcy. But Mr. Collins in the beginning of that is like when he asks, he's like, oh, you'd make a perfect like wife for a clergyman kind of thing.
Yeah. You are formed for labor, not for love.
Yeah, you shall be mine. I claim you, not for my pleasure, but for my sovereign's service.
Yikes.
Yeah, this is, and this is what he has been grooming her for all along. He's been seeding this kind of these ideas in her and constantly putting them in her thoughts and getting her to do things for him. So now when he finally springs the question, of course she has to say yes, because I have, guided her to this point.
I think this too really disturbs me, that he had calculated on these first objections. He was not irritated by them. That it's that he's a brick wall. You can't argue with him. You can't even hit it. Like, it's not even that he's hyper rational. You can't even appeal to him from a logical standpoint. He's just not going to hear you. And that he has planned in advance the entire argument, and nothing you say can really shake him is such a disturbing, not a throwaway line in there, but she just very disturbing thing to put in there of like, and he anticipated this. And humility. I was still...
He's like, oh, I'll give you, like, don't worry, you should be humble. I've watched you ever since we first met. I have made you my study for 10 months. I have proved you in that time by sundry tests. Now that also harkens back to Rochester, how Rochester and admits to Jane in that garden scene that I had a plan for you, and I've been watching you, and I've been doing this, all along. But this is what we're supposed to recognize. And again, I've said this before. I think that's why St. John's literally in the novel.
Yeah.
This is as the plot, because as you're trying to create this plot here and for Jane, and that Rochester has done such a horrible thing. Well, yes, you want to redeem him, of course, but you also have to get the reader back on his side as well.
Yes. Yeah.
And I think that St. John kind of becomes that in this novel, that it's like, now that, like, I've seen Rochester's plan and that wasn't good and he shouldn't have done that. And now I see St. John's plan and it's like,
this is the same thing, but for the wrong reasons.
Oh, this is really bad. Maybe Rochester is so bad after all.
All relative, as it turns out.
Now, Rochester still needs to be redeemed himself, but at least I think this is the beginning of getting the reader back it's funny, getting the reader back on Jane's side, because Jane still believes in Rochester. But why should the reader believe in Rochester after what he's done? Well, we have to get back with what Jane thinks, so we should.
Yeah. And I think that, I know for quite a few readers after Jane leaves Rochester, they're sort of like, but why would she leave? She is it really enough? I think sometimes people tend to be like, well, Jane's being too cold. Jane's the one who's being too unemotional. They sort of echo Rochester a little bit of this is too cruel to leave him. They are in love. Shouldn't that kind of trump all the conventions? And it doesn't. obviously it doesn't, because she does leave Rochester, but I think this is sort of the counter argument, which is
Mhm.
if Jane was only concerned about morality and conventions at the expense of her own emotions, then she would just marry St. John. He's kind of the opposite end of that spectrum, but he's not. She is still, I think, fundamentally doing these for her own emotional truths.
Yeah.
And that's so I think it changes how we view Rochester, but I do think it changes how we view Jane's choice too,
Mhm.
because we get more insight into why she left and why she wouldn't just then run into St. John and marry him.
Yeah. She needs both. It has to be, we have to be completely in love, soulmates,
Yes, yeah.
totally intertwined, but it also has to be respectable. It can't be
Yes.
it can't be against what, the whole world and what my religious and kind of beliefs say. It's got, everything's got to fit.
Yeah. The insides have to match the outsides. And again, the thing that she railed against as a child was that someone wasn't telling the truth. That has always been her problem is this person's lying, this person isn't telling the truth. And she has to live the truth because she can't live any other way. And this is just as much a lie as Rochester having a second wife, up in the attic, or a first wife, really trying to get a second wife. But him hiding that, St. John's hiding things too. St. John is not being truthful in anything he's doing.
You said that, and I'm like Rochester. What wife? What wife? I don't have a wife. What are you talking about?
You can't prove anything. Like shoving
always
Bertha
said.
into
What
a closet.
wife?
Like, yeah, there's nothing to see here.
She's right there. Well, let me tell you why she's not my wife, but she's your wife.
Can't explain it.
Jane is, but now she's feeling the pressure. She says that my iron shroud contracted round me, persuasion advanced with slow, sure step. Now she's in peril here. She thinks I can do what he wants me to do.
Yeah. And he does, again, narrate her to a certain extent. He reads her actions accurately, if not completely, her going back to the school.
Yeah.
But he has also too, I think, again, sucked all the emotion out of it.
Yep.
She's going back to the school to visit, her students because it's her duty to perform labor, not because she might actually care about her students. She gives them money out of a sense of justice, not because, she cares for the people around her. He's reading her, but he's only reading half of her. Same thing with Rochester. Again, he's reading her emotions. Rochester was reading her emotions, but not the duty aspect of her. So they're both only reading one side of her.
That's good. Yeah. And he says, well, she says, I can do it. And, and then she realizes, well, if I can't have Rochester, what the heck am I doing here? I believe I must say yes. And yet I shudder. And now she starts to realize, if I do make the sacrifice, I will make it absolutely. I'll throw all on the altar, heart, vitals, the entire victim. And that she realizes is that, she can't do, because the one dreadful item is he asked me to be his wife, and has no more of a husband's heart for me than that frowning giant of a rock down which the stream is forming in yonder gorge. Can I receive from him the bridal ring, endure all the forms of love, which I doubt not he would scrupulously observe, lie back and think of England, I'm sure would be his, and know that the spirit was quite absent. I mean, this is what she can't be. She can't give up her heart.
Yeah. And it's
That's
interesting
more important to her.
To bring in another question, which is that she does equate going to India with dying.
Yes.
She says, I don't think I would last very long in that climate. And I don't think I'd last very long in that life, because it's a difficult life.
Roberta asked that question. She says, can you talk why Jane thinks if she goes to India as a teacher that she would die there? Because of the climate, and she's somebody raised in England in a much different climate, and that is what frequently happened to people. And it's not just oh, it's so hot there, you're not used to heat. It is, now that we know, there's all kinds of bacteria, germs that aren't here, and disease, and that's why you're going to die. And Yeah, it's a hard life, and
Yeah.
she's not going to survive that.
And she says, if I join St. John, I abandon half myself. If I go to India, I go to a premature death. So yeah, also that's dangerous, and that she doesn't feel like physically she'd live very long. But that's, sort of parallel to that in choosing to go. She's almost, it's a weird, almost like self murder thing that she's like, if I go, there's kind of nothing tying me to life because I've already killed half of myself to do that. And I would do that. I'd kill half of myself, but I can't kill the other half.
Yep.
So
that's what I can't kill. That's what Sharon asks here. Wondering throughout the insistence that they must be married. Is it really about appearances, or does he want Jane to be his loveless sexual partner? So let's get to St. John's response to this, because she says, "I may go to India if I may go free." Like, this is Jane. Like, I have to be free. We can,
no net and snares me.
Yeah. So, and he says, no, either our union must be consecrated and sealed by marriage, or it cannot exist. Practical obstacles oppose themselves to any other plan. She argues like, duh, like I'm just your relative and I'm going with you, and we could do that.
Practically incest anyway. So just,
he is absolutely against that.
Yeah.
He says, I can't, you can't, you have to, do it as my wife. She says, but before that, even she says, "Oh, I will give my heart to God." Oh, all right. Well, he's like, "I want a wife, the soul help meet. I can influence efficiently in life and retain absolutely till death." That's why he wants you to be his wife, because he needs that. Like, I have to be able to completely control you.
Yes. And again, completely vampiric language, gothic language. But also I think deeply psychological language of, if I can control this person, I can also control myself. I mean, so much about St. John is him killing and repressing his own emotional needs and his natural instincts. And, now he needs to do the same thing to an outward. So like you said, he's made himself a sociopath, and now he needs a victim essentially to do that.
And we know he does think of, sexual, sensual pleasures and is really, kind of turned on by that, only if he can put them in a little like 15-minute box by the watch.
Yeah.
And so,
and that when she again was being very grave about the kissing and didn't seem to be enjoying it particularly much, that was when he was the most pleased by it.
So I think there is something perverse about this. I think there is something perverse about him wanting to, like, you have to marry me, and he is going to get some perverse pleasure out of literally, having sex with his wife, who he knows neither of them are in love. So, and
then conflating him and God very much. Do you think God will be satisfied with a half? Will he accept a mutilated sacrifice? I'm like, we're still talking about you though, not God.
Yeah,
you God, but that he jumps back between his will, what he wants, and God's will, what God wants, almost interchangeably, as if there is no distinction. So weaponizing a certain kind of Christianity to suit his own needs, which is wildly.
He'd be a great cult leader, huh? He would have a cult in a heartbeat.
Break out the Kool-Aid. Here we are.
So I love her response here. It's like, "Oh, I will give my heart to God. You do not want it."
Yeah. I love too her follow-up. "I will not swear, reader, that there was not something of repressed sarcasm both in the tone in which I uttered the sentence and in the feeling that accompanied it." She's like, "I'm not saying that I was being sarcastic, but I'm not saying that I was."
Yeah, you were being really sarcastic.
And his reaction too, that he's like, is she being sarcastic to me? To me?
Yeah, he's shocked by this.
Yeah.
This is what really, and this is where she sees him, right?
Yes. Yeah.
"I saw his fallibilities." You see that in that paragraph? Read that.
Yes. So "I will not swear, reader. I had silently feared St. John until now, because I had not understood him. He had held me in awe because he had held me in doubt. How much of him was saint, how much mortal, I could not dare to foretell, but revelations were being made in this conference. The analysis of his nature was proceeding before my eyes. I saw his fallibilities. I comprehended them. I understood that sitting there where I did, on the bank of the heath, and with that handsome form before me, I sat at the feet of a man, erring as I. The veil fell from his hardness and despotism. Having felt in him the presence of these qualities, I felt his imperfection and took courage. I was with an equal, one with whom I might argue, one whom, if I saw good, I might resist.
Yeah, I love
so,
that.
yeah.
What a this is the turn. This is
the whole part of this, that it's a moment of sarcastic, like snap back humor, which is so Jane, which is again just Jane is an underrated comedian throughout the entire book. Yeah, a very, very Janian reply of I'm going to drag you. You won't even know I've done it until it's too late. And that she is more like herself now than she has been at any point in this chapter. And yes, that she sees him now as a person. And I was with an equal, one with whom I might argue. And again, it's another, I do think it harkens back to the proposal scene with Rochester, which is, she sees Rochester as an equal. She says, we're equals. You can marry Blanche Ingram, but she's not your equal. I am. And you can't say anything to me that I can't kind of snap back to, because we are the same.
Mm-hmm.
So for her to do that as a moment of resistance in this moment, I think is very interesting.
Nikki has an interesting question here. She says, well, how was he planning to be a missionary all alone before he met Jane? Why is she so vital? Will her sacrifice give him her strength? And now I'm thinking, was he really planning this trip actually before Jane? Or does the I don't know.
I think he was thinking about it, but kind of in a distant way. But he was still I think he still had enough. I mean, he had his sisters and he had Rosamond prior to this, and it's only after Jane arrives that he really settles on this as something he's going to do. So it might be that he hadn't settled on it until he's like, okay, I can do this, but Jane's going to be my crutch and my reward.
Yeah, maybe like she was the final piece. I mean, his father had to die, and then so he can then go on and or move on from his parish. But now that Jane is there, she's the final answer to that. What I need to do is go and do this, and she'd help me.
That too might be part of the reason, again, why he harps so much on the marriage aspect. Is this feels like a sort of a coming of age Bildungsroman move of, okay, I was a child and then I was a young man and then my father died, and I was the patriarch of that family, but now I need to be the patriarch of sort of a nuclear family, so I need the wife to move on to the next stage of my life. That he sees Jane as a wife, as an object he can own, but also as the step into a next stage of manhood. Perhaps is also why he might be a bit like this. And there is that fatherhood aspect as well, that then he moves into parenthood, because that's the next stage. So,
well, Jane is finally real the fetters have dropped, and now she realizes, oh, we're equals. You have issues, and I understand that now, and I can resist. I might resist. And he's like, what? Are you being sarcastic? Blah, blah, blah. He gets all annoyed at this. And then when he finishes it by, you will hasten to enter into that union at once.
Yeah. And again, it's full of pseudo rationality and trying to twist the argument, which again, I find really disturbing from just a gaslighting psychological perspective. But
she just says, shall I?
Shall I? Outlook does not look good. Let me check your horoscope today.
Yeah.
Outlook, not great.
But she sticks by what she says. She says, I repeat, I freely consent to go with you as your fellow missionary, but not as your wife. I cannot marry you and become part of you. That's what marriage means. I become part of you, not I become your helpmeet slave that you own till death. It means part of you, and he can't get that.
Yeah. And she describes earlier too, I should suffer, no doubt, attached to him only in this capacity. My body would be under rather a stringent yoke, but my heart and mind would be free. So again, it's back to childhood. It's back to Lowood. It's back to all things where, there is no entrapping Jane Eyre. You can do whatever you want to her. physically, but emotionally and mentally, she's out there.
And maybe this then finally explains St. John, because he says, though you have a man's vigorous brain, you have a woman's heart, and it would not do.
It would not do. It would not do.
So it would do, I affirm with some disdain,
Yes.
perfectly well.
Yeah,
She
I have a
probably
woman's heart,
jumps on
but
that.
not where you're concerned.
Yeah.
For you, I have only a comrade's constancy, a fellow soldier's frankness, fidelity, fraternity, if you like, a neophyte's respect and submission to his hierophant. Nothing more. Don't fear. Don't worry that I'm ever going to fall in love with you, St. John. It's not going to happen.
Yeah, and the moment where like Jane realizes that, like, wait a minute, this kind of master student thing isn't very good. And I wonder if that's Charlotte Bronte like really saying like, yeah, I'm
in hindsight, yeah.
I need to be more than just the neophyte, have that neophyte respect and submission.
He says, it is what I want. It is just what I want. I think again, and she says this, the next line, they have a completely different idea. They're talking about different things, completely different things. He has so divorced himself from the emotional side of his identity that he's like, yeah, no, that's right. Right. Isn't that what marriage is supposed to be? A fellow soldier's frankness. Is that not what we were aiming for here? But her comeback is great.
I scorn your idea of love. Woo. That's it.
You can tell he's crossed the line.
Yep.
Because she's like, you know what? Now it's open rebellion. It's open season on St. John Rivers, and I'm a going hunting.
I love the language. She says, I scorn your idea of love. I could not help saying, as I rose up and stood before him, leaning my back against the rock. She's got support here. And I scorn the counterfeit sentiment you offer. Yes, St. John, and I scorn you when you offer it.
Yeah. And again, repeating past instances with Jane where she speaks almost against her will in certain places when she really has something important to say. It just comes out of her. It's a sort of natural genius. She just sort of says it and it happens. And how she describes it, a counterfeit sentiment, something that is false, something that looks correct but is not correct. And again, the fundamental thing with her, that it's not marriage for marriage's sake. It has to be real, it has to be true, or else Jane sees no value in it. And that has always been kind of her defining aspect as a character, is she tells the truth and she's a heroine for the truth. And then she basically insults him to his face and he's like, okay.
Yep. And now he's like, now he's really like, she completely owned you.
Yes.
And
we love to see it. We love to see it.
And then he says, you have to do it. You're going to do it. It's a scheme, my long cherished scheme. God says you have to do it.
And he basically kind of says, you promised, you said you would.
And
she's like, I said I would on the condition.
Yeah.
That he again, disturbingly is really putting a lot of words in her mouth without listening.
Well, he says, I'm going to go away for a fortnight to go to Cambridge and say goodbye to some people. And when I come back, you'll give me the answer that, I think you're going to
want to hear. Yeah.
I love that she quotes more Scott, turning for me. He wants more, look to river, look to hill. So Scott's never far from Charlotte Bronte here to quote little Leia the Last Minstrel line there. Just,
And I have from my wonderful pencil drawings.
Ooh, look at that.
Yes. Jane triumphant. We should do this. Yeah.
Determined.
Yep. St. John's face in the rivers and the dales, and she's done. She's got it.
She is. All right.
So
she says, as I walked by his side homeward, I read well in his iron silence all he felt towards me, the disappointment of an austere and despotic nature, which has met resistance where it expected submission. Well, now we get in Jane's back. Jane Eyre is back.
She is. Yeah.
She is. And then at night, he kissed his sisters And he doesn't kiss Jane.
No, doesn't even shake her hand.
His little petty, moves here.
Yeah.
Now it's become petty. Before it was like all horrible and manipulative, and now it's just petty. He's hurt.
And that, I think there's more recognition too of him being emotionally withholding, and that's why he's doing it, and that's the effect it's having on
work before.
Yeah.
Let's try this.
But Jane seems a lot more conscious of it now.
She knows what's going on. She still runs after him. She says, I ran after him. He stood at the foot of the stairs. Like, she's like, but I still need to, we need to be a family. Like, this is like, she's doing it because we can't have discord in our house because the sisters have noticed it. You can't have discord. That's why she goes. She doesn't go now. She doesn't go to appease him. She goes after she talks to Diana.
And despite everything, she does consistently say, he is a good man and I do value his friendship. Like, she doesn't seem to attribute necessarily malicious motives to him, just a failure of understanding and an intractability that prevents any kind of compromise. So again, it is interesting to me that she doesn't take the opportunity of just being like, he's a monster, we should all hate him. She reinforces again and again, and I think this is part of Bronte's brilliance is, he really is not a one-dimensional character as much as we would love for him to be. He is complicated and complex and compelling in his own way because she traces back the origins of his motives to very human experiences. But that doesn't mean he's good for Jane. And again, I think the psychological complexity of their relationship is just breathtaking. Like, you don't even see that in a whole lot of contemporary novels, let alone, 1800s.
Well, and I asked him if he forgave me. He answered that he was not in the habit of cherishing the remembrance of vexation. Like, what do you mean forgive? Like, come on.
Did you say something that would have offended me? Oh, I didn't hear it.
With that answer, he left me. I would much rather he had knocked me down. Now, but this is all, like, I think this is at this point in this chapter now, and after everything that's going on, this is less to do with her trying to please him as, the dominator of this relationship, and more like, now he's bringing this discord into our happy home.
Yes.
And that's not, that really upsets her.
Yeah. And I think that's why in the next chapter, it's their interaction's a lot more fraught. It's a lot less about, I'm going to argue you out of it, and more I think it's a much more emotional fight that they get into in the next chapter. And then of course it ends with the supernatural intervention. So
we timed this well, because I think I'm done.
Yes, we're at the end.
Done my what is it?
St. John's bloody-mindedness. Bloody-mindedness.
Although I'm not really done. Look, I've got like a whole picture. So
yes.
There'll be more after the show.
It's only 3:45. We got time.
Well, that's really good. He doesn't give her a kiss. He gives her a handshake, and then she's upset, and that's the way this ends. Yeah. And that's that. Princess Obscura, I asked a question here, just as an aside, Ed, do you think of offering a Dickens book study sometime? Curiously hoping for someday. Wait, I know I love Dickens behind me. I mention him almost every show for some reason. It's not just the beard. Well, we will. There are 3 episodes left, and we will announce the next book that we will work through slowly over many, many, weeks. We'll let everybody know in the very last episode of Sundays with Jane Eyre. So
very exciting.
I have to wait till then to hear what our next book will be. Will it be Dickens? I'm not going to even say no or yes right now. So, I'll let you all think of what it might be, and then we'll announce in our last show. Brontesaurs and Airheads, thank you for tuning in today. We'll post this recording on our website. It's already on our YouTube channel, live streaming. If that's how you're watching, thanks for watching there. We also have a Sundays with Jane Eyre Facebook group where you can continue the conversation. Always wonderful posts on there. Thank you, everybody, for engaging there. And I invite, if you don't, to do that. Also go to the Rosamax YouTube account, like the Jane Eyre video, subscribe to the channel. You can leave comments there as well. Thanks to Brianna, who is our chat Mrs. Fairfax again today and for almost the entire season of this. Thanks for managing the links in the chat, Brianna. Next week on episode 26, author Rowan Coleman returns to talk about volume 3, chapters 9 and 10. We'll do 2 chapters next week, chapters 35 and 36, when Jane hears a voice calling to her. So,
always a good sign.
yes. Just 3 episodes left, everyone. If you're looking for more virtual engagement, head on over to the Rosenbach website. Check out the other virtual offerings we have. And it's funny, I didn't even do our mid-break today. I was so engaged in talking to you, and which, you know, which I let people know that, you know, we do the show to you for free. So if you can support the Rosenbach, please do it. We're asking for donations of $18.47 to support the show, because the novel was published in 1847. We had a new member join, someone donate last week, Margaret F. from Philadelphia. Thank you for donating, Margaret. We also had 2 new members joined last week, Deborah T. from Kennett Square, PA, and Maria V. from Terrell Hills, Texas, joined the Rosenbach in support of the show. Thank you so much. Members of the Rosenbach get free and exclusive access to some programs, plus 10% off reading courses, including a great Bronte course coming up after this show ends on four Sundays. Lots of great courses and programs coming up. You can go to our website and see all of those. And the Rosenbach's also open to visit. So see our website for how it's safe for you to come and visit the Rosenbach and see our exhibitions and visit the historic house and come see the in-person programs that are going to start to really happen next month and going forward. So Kathleen, thank you so much.
Thank you very much for having me. I look forward to the wrapping up the book.
Awesome. All righty. Well, everyone, thank you. Playing us out over the credits will be Pleated Gazelle's wonderful song, Secrets. Farewell, readers. May you live entirely for and with what you love best on earth. Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye.